Okay. Well, good afternoon, and can I welcome you all to the Educational Skills Policy Development Committee and wish you all a happy new year. And perhaps we wouldn't have chosen to be where we are when the last time we met, but we are where we are, and let's hope that this year is better than the one we've just endured. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. I've had one from Beverly Hopkin. Are there any others, Gareth?
I haven't had any others, Chair, no.
Anyone with any apologies? If not, item 2, disclosures of personal prejudicial interest, any? In which case we'll go on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of December. They've been circulated. Just go through them for accuracy.
Yeah, look okay. Yeah.
Fine.
I'll second them, Rob.
People happy with the minutes? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll sign those in due course. Whenever I come into the Guildhall.
We'll have forgotten the way in now, Rob, before the time we get in there.
At least you don't get a parking ticket.
Takes us to item 4, update feedback from challenge advisors. And I think when we envisaged this agenda, perhaps, well, it certainly wasn't the case that we thought we'd be where we are today. So what I've asked Helen to do is to kick us off this afternoon by updating us on the report we received last meeting and what are how things have developed and what are the learning points from then until now. So it's over to you, Helen, and if you give us the verbal update.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so when we last met, I think it was around the 9th of December as a committee. And obviously, since that time, schools closed early at the end of the autumn term. And I use the word closed with caution because obviously the word school closures makes the headlines, but the reality is very different. What actually happens is a switch to remote learning, and you have off-site learning going on. So on the 11th of December, our schools in Swansea actually closed for on-site learning, and they switched to that remote learning up until the 18th of December largely. Our school term ended in Swansea on the 22nd. Nearly all of our schools had planned inset days on the 21st and 22nd. So in summary, for the autumn term, our schools did a remarkable job, as we know, in terms of trying to recover and trying to get back into school and to minimise the risks for children and staff. And they kept learning going as far as possible during the autumn term. So that's the position we faced just before Christmas. Since Christmas, our current position is that all schools in Swansea are closed largely for on-site learning. However, vulnerable children and the children of critical workers are allowed on-site safely, where there is safe capacity to do so. They receive not just care, but they also must receive learning. And it's different to the first time round when we went into lockdown in March. So this time round, you've got learning going on as well. So you can't just offer childcare, it has to be learning. So basically, there was an announcement, I think from recollection, it was over a week ago, where we had to follow the national position really in Swansea, which meant that there will be a national review of the current situation on the 29th of January. And if there is a significant reduction in the R rate in terms of transmission in society of the coronavirus, then the position of schools across Wales will be reviewed. But unless there's a reduction, we anticipate holding this position until February half term. So for us in Swansea, that means that the February half term starts on Monday, the 15th of February. And we would return on the 22nd, the following Monday. So that's where we are currently. And just to say, obviously, our school sites didn't suddenly become unsafe because of a new variant, but a lot of the headlines in the press reported that the new variant was problematic, and that indeed sent a ripple through the education system in Wales. So building back the confidence of staff to come back on site is key. And in Swansea, we managed to provide a great deal of assurance to our workforce in schools, to teachers and TAs by updating our risk assessment, and we paid due regard to that variant, and we followed the sage advice really given to mitigate against that. So that is the current position in Swansea, Chair.
You're on mute, Rob.
Mute. Yeah, I talk more sense when I'm on mute. But can I thank you, Helen, for that update? It is appreciated. Looking back at the last report, and some of the things that came up then, things like there were access issues, sharing issues for equipment. There were issues around digital access anyway. Issues then around how confident people were in using and in teaching through VLE recorded lessons and so on. Is there any evidence of where we are now compared to where we were, say, during the last lockdown and early as things progressed throughout the last term?
Yeah, before I bring my colleagues in, I'll just say on the accessibility issue in terms of devices and connectivity, we did update our position in Swansea last week, and we presented our findings to the Welsh Local Government Association. So in terms of the learners who do not have appropriate devices, they are around 2,000 in number. Now that is based on the pupil population in Swansea, and you've got two cuts where you can look at a pupil population. You can look at the statutory aged pupils, which is around 29,000, or you can look at including our sixth form schools. There are 7 out of 14 secondaries in that mix. So the 2,000 represents quite a small percentage. However, it's not something we would tolerate in terms of not having suitable devices. So we are working behind the scenes to ask for more resource to ensure that we haven't got children in families who have to share devices or have inappropriate devices. But a lot of our schools have been innovative. You may have seen that they're using gaming devices to access learning, and indeed some of our schools have purchased keyboards to enable them to access learning and access the Hub national platform through their gaming devices. So we are still working on that situation. And in terms of connectivity across Swansea schools, we had reported 900 children actually who didn't have good enough connectivity. So again, we're still working on that. We are loaning out MiFi devices, and we're keeping close monitoring on that to ensure that they're actually being used as well. But it's not to say that we are in a perfect situation in Swansea where everybody has access to the right equipment and the right connectivity. And in terms of the actual prescription of how children and young people learn remotely, as a local authority, and indeed as a nation, we haven't told our schools there is one way of doing it. We are very much keen that our schools adopt a range of approaches that suits their community and suits their learners. Now you may say, well, that provides inequity and things aren't on a par. Unfortunately, that is true. We're not currently offering the same offer in every school in Swansea and indeed across Wales, but we are developing better ways of doing things, and that is indeed our innovation. We are actually doing things better every time, and we are encouraging our schools to look carefully at their provision and to ask for feedback from their own families and from their own children and students to see how they can improve it. And I'll stop there because I know I've got lead challenge advisors and their +1s with us today, and I don't want to steal any of their thunder.
I'll call Lyndon in first, and then I'll call Rob Davis.
Great. Thanks, Robert. Yeah, you know, obviously it's a city where it's a problem. You know, obviously throughout not just Swansea but throughout Wales. Actually, the number of people who haven't got equipment, but sadly, out of that 2,000, they will be people. A lot of them probably the ones on free school meals, and you know, they are falling behind now. They'll fall further behind. That's a worry there. I know locally on the governing body in Bishopston School, and but I bought some equipment for both Bishopston and the comprehensive school, the primary and comprehensive, from my community budget to help, you know. But that was a way of sending just a small number out. But clearly it is an issue, and as I say, those people on free school meals will be probably in that 2,000, quite a large portion on them, I would have thought.
There is some good news I should mention as well. In terms of our return to the Welsh Local Government Association last Friday, during the course of Friday, we received 1,600 laptops, new devices through the infrastructure programme for IT that you may have heard of. And indeed, we delivered on Friday morning last week 800 new devices to our secondary schools. Now, by this week, we have another clutch of devices coming through for our primary sector. So we've prioritised our secondary schools because they can configure their own devices, but for the primary sector, we will need to do this centrally first before issuing out to primary schools. So the good news is the pipeline for new devices has actually been unblocked, because you may have heard us say previously that we were waiting for new devices to arrive in Swansea, but we did have 1,600 arrive on Friday.
You know, you mentioned the figure of 2,000 earlier. Would that 1,600 provide some of those 2,000?
Yeah,
Right.
by the time the devices are distributed, we anticipate that number will come down. But obviously, we've been waiting for new devices to arrive. So at a certain point in time, in all honesty, those learners didn't have appropriate devices. Not to say they didn't have anything, but they didn't have appropriate devices for their learning.
Okay, I'll call Mike and then Des Thomas want to come in.
Yeah. Hello, Helen. To date, first of all, I'm very pleased to hear that we've had more devices down and you distribute them at the rate of knots. But to date, can you give the committee any indication of how many devices have been supplied to our young people for their learning? And of the devices, probably Robert might have to answer this one, but of the devices that have been supplied, have you any feedback on how many have been unused? Because that was reported in the press last week that a lot of these devices had been unused. I don't know whether we know or we can get information on that, technical information or feedback. Rob will probably have to answer that. But great news, thank you.
Thanks. I'll answer that question then as best I can. Obviously, I haven't got the figures in hand, you know, up-to-date figures in front of me, but we can supply you with the most recent information about how much we've distributed so far. And you're right to point out that we've heard that some devices aren't being used. We've heard that some MiFi connectivity devices are not being used as well. And I think there is a mechanism for us to check that, and Welsh Government have asked us really to keep an eye on the logins so we can monitor the situation, because obviously we don't want to be issuing devices if they're not being used where the need is greater somewhere else. So we'll monitor that carefully, and we'll provide the up-to-date information as soon as we can.
Thank you very much.
Des, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've put the my question in writing there. Basically, has consideration been given to allow children who do not have equipment at home to attend school, you know, alongside those of key workers, etc.?
Yeah, that would be a consideration, Councillor Thomas, because it makes them very vulnerable by the nature of the fact that they're not accessing learning. But obviously, online learning is only one method of learning, and in some instances, paper-based learning activities do the same job. And indeed, in some cases, we've realised that children and youngsters prefer this type of learning as well. So it's not to say that the online offer is the panacea for everything.
No.
But the key point is that there is access, isn't there? There is some kind of learning. And if it's not available, that should be a consideration for them coming in on site to access the equipment from schools.
Okay, thank you.
Sam?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on the point Helen was talking about, and I think it's a really important point, Chair, and I think we should include on the record that schools are not closed, the school buildings are closed. And I think for those of us who are school governors, we know how hard staff are working, and in many cases, staff are having to work much harder from home than they would previously. And so it is really positive to see really the public support recently for teachers. I would like to put on my record, Chair, that my thanks to all of the teachers across Swansea, and particularly in my ward, who I know are putting in so much effort to deliver these services, because having to do things digitally, I know, takes a lot more time to learn how to do it and then to do it. But the support of teachers has been phenomenal. And I do think it is really quite exciting, and I think it will be really helpful if pupils are able to access through games consoles and things like Xboxes, and hopefully that will increase the number of children who are then able to access the brilliant provision that our teachers in incredibly difficult circumstances are providing. But I just wanted to thank both our teaching staff and then all of the support staff and council staff for their fantastic work in what is a really incredibly turbulent and difficult period. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sam. Rob, you've been sitting there very patiently. Do you want me to call you in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Helen stole my thunder there. I was just going to give an update on the devices. 1,050 laptops, Chromebooks went out to secondaries yesterday. So the secondaries are busy building up, ready to go out to the families that need them. And the same as Helen mentioned there, for primary, we've got to do it. Our own IT team are doing that now. So they'll be going out to primary later this week. So, it's coming through the pipeline. We're getting there. Is the message. And the other thing I'd say, I think, it's not just the devices. We've heard about devices going to places and not being used. I think we finished the last meeting talking about it's the variation in support that pupils are having in the home. Are the parents, working with the pupils, checking on them, giving that regulation, making sure they're getting up on time, or are they drifting? It's that type of thing, really. The family background is equally as important, I think, as having the devices.
And are we capturing that? I think is my next question. Are schools capturing it, and are we capturing if there's an issue in schools?
Yeah, schools are working really hard, to chase up with pupils who aren't engaging. They've got good records digitally to see who's not responding, who's not returning work. Schools are using different systems to sort of register to see that they're getting up. Even if they're not doing live lessons, they have to send an email in, that type of thing, and they're chasing it up. So they're doing what they can do. But, there are still families and there's pupils who, there's apathy, they're being distracted, they're doing other things, and that's the challenge.
Well, in terms of our own staff, challenge advisors and so on, what are they picking up? I think is one of my questions here. What are they picking up from schools, and what are schools asking for in terms of support?
Do you want to start with primary or secondary?
Can I start with primary?
Okay, Damien.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, so my colleague Sarah Lloyden is with me as well today. So we've got some updates we can give you, Chair, from our support visits that were conducted in the second half of the autumn term. We're not exactly in the situation we're in now, but it certainly feeds into the situation we're in now, because through the support visits, which more often than not took place via Teams. When they could, they happened face to face, but more often than not via Teams or via the phone. The challenge advisors were following a sort of, a loose agenda, if you like, but with a few common themes. We were discussing with schools their blended learning approach. We were discussing with schools their approach to well-being of pupils and staff. We talked to schools about their preparations for the curriculum for Wales, which the timeline of which hasn't changed in terms of its implementation. Their priorities, their new priorities, and how they were they're spending their grants. As you know, one of the grants they've been given, schools have been given, is the Accelerated Learning Programme, the grant for Recruit, Recover, and Raise Standards. So, if you're willing, I'll take you through some of the headline information that we've picked up through the visits.
Yes, yeah, I think it's good for the committee to know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So Sarah and I are doing this, if you like, in tandem. So I'll talk about my bit first of all. So common concerns highlighted by school senior leaders included disruption to learning due to self-isolation of classes and year groups. I think you were in the distribution list, so you'll know disruption rather was coming thick and fast due to isolation, especially towards the end of the term. Heads were concerned about schools possibly being repurposed at short notice to become childcare settings, but as Helen mentioned earlier on, schools haven't been repurposed, and I think Councillor Pritchard as well mentioned this just now. They are still providing an education. It's just on site for far fewer children for obvious reasons. There are changes to work and organisational practices, face-to-face, blended, distance learning. Just the operations of running a school, they were concerns for heads. And then the absences of staff and pupils, anxiety, understandably, of staff, pupils and families, and the pressure, the seemingly relentless pressure on head teachers and senior leaders. Just briefly on the areas of greatest impact, we sort of picked up on, it's the operational management. Then there was the learning environment, curriculum, and the learning skills and attitude of the pupils. And then there's well-being. So we'll touch on those in the next few moments. What we were seeing with regard to operational management, which we're still seeing to a degree, that was working well, is staggered start and finish times, staggered breaks and lunch times, schools maintaining their bubbles or contact groups, if you like, and limiting staff and pupil contact. One-way systems were in operation around schools, and these are no doubt still in operation. Changes to entry and egress arrangements. There was a reduction in face-to-face contact with parents and guardians. This is things we were finding over this autumn term. Limiting resource sharing, that became they were ensuring that a child would access their resources, and it would only that child or that pupil would access their resources. And of course, the arrangements for hand washing, face covering, increased cleaning. So all of these things were operational considerations heads needed to think about and build into their risk assessments and their operational plans. So Sarah's going to talk to you now briefly about the impact and the outcomes of the changes to operational management, if that's okay.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, in terms of impact and outcomes, the local authority health and safety officer has undertaken a series of audits. To date, she's conducted 27 audits of our schools, and she's reviewed obviously the health and safety arrangements in schools. The outcomes of those have been really positive. In terms of risk assessments and operational plans are being adhered to. All of the arrangements in terms of, as Damien was talking about, things like hand washing, increased cleaning, all of that was found to be in operation. Some really strong points that were seen across the vast majority of those 27 settings. PPE grab bags were available. Staff were, leaders were mindful of staff's well-being, and there was an excellent attitude and behaviour of pupils in terms of the new arrangements. A few things for schools to consider in terms of improvements. They were looking at ventilation, increased ventilation, just making sure that staff rooms were adhering to the 2-metre social distancing rules, and just making sure that there was consistency in terms of that across the school. We've had not just local authority inspections of the operational arrangements in schools. We've had the Health and Safety Executive visit a number of our settings over during the autumn term. Some really positive outcomes there. Just to name a few schools: St David's Primary, Clydach Primary, some really positive outcomes. Staff and pupils have understood the requirements. They've made sure that they're adhering to all of those, and particularly in our larger primary schools, where they've sort of set in new start and finish times, that's worked incredibly well. So places like St Joseph's Cathedral, Birch Grove Primary School. I know that Damien has actually observed that himself after a school visit to Birch Grove. So, those pupils showing real resilience in terms of the changes. There were no mean feat in terms of them sort of coming back to school with a long period off, and then finding that the day-to-day organisation of the school had changed. And in terms of parents and being able to meet with parents, obviously that was very difficult in the autumn term, and schools stepped up to that. They were making sure that those parents that they needed to see on a regular basis, they were meeting with those virtually, and those seemed to be working really well and in a time managed way. So that's looking at the operational issues in terms of our schools. In terms of the learning environment, I've been into school, I've probably made 12 visits into school over the autumn term, and I've actually been into 4 of my 8 schools, and they look quite different. There's a considerable reduction in terms of furniture in classrooms. That's been a lot of that has been reconfigured. I'm seeing in some of my schools where, to ensure that pupils were front facing, they were sitting in rows or sitting in an arc with the teacher sort of 2 meters away, using the interactive whiteboard. A lot more social distancing, reduced interaction between groups of pupils. And we've seen a huge increase in the use of the outdoors to allow for our primary children to have that greater interaction. And you'll notice from the news and also from the discussions that we've had with staff in schools that the requests for things like forest schools training has increased dramatically. So in terms of the impact on our learning environment and the sorts of things that schools have put in place, well, how has that fared in our larger primaries? Where possible, pupils have been put in year group bubbles rather than class bubbles to allow for that greater interaction. And again, in our large primary schools like Birch Grove and St Joseph's Cathedral, that's working incredibly well. Outdoors and outdoor learning has been a priority, and that's allowed for greater safe interaction between our pupils. So as a consequence, schools are engaging in research around that area now as part of the National Professional Inquiry Project, for example. Birch Grove Primary is looking at the use of the outdoors. We've got some lovely work going on in Llanryddian Primary School. And in terms of Clace Primary, where they were looking at quite low engagement levels in terms of pupils and their work during lockdown. They put in place family projects so that families where there were a number of primary age pupils within the family, they were looking at a sort of theme, a school theme, and a lot of the activities that were planned for outdoors, particularly in that lovely weather that we had during the summer term. In terms of curriculum, well, obviously there have been some constraints there, but schools have responded incredibly well. Some of the curriculum has been slimmed down, much greater focus on literacy, numeracy and IT, but that's been placed as best as schools can within an authentic real life context. The creative arts have been somewhat constrained in terms of the new social distancing rules. There's been a lot of work required around upskilling with IT in terms of the hardware, the use of the software. It's had implications in terms of marking, giving pupils marking, feedback, assessment. They've also had to sort of monitor the levels of engagement of pupils, just the question that you were asking earlier. What happens now in terms of the gaps in learning, and also in terms of senior leadership teams, in terms of their monitoring approaches. They've changed considerably because staff are working from home. How are they maintaining consistency in terms of the approaches that staff are taking? So in terms of the impact and outcomes, literacy, numeracy and IT, obviously the focus, particularly till the 31st of January with the Welsh Government's modification to the curriculum requirements. But schools are working incredibly hard. We've got some lovely work going on, for example, in Glencorthlin Primary, where they've worked on a whole school theme called Belonging. We've had Craigfeilin Primary School and developing a whole school enterprise project. Teachers researching pedagogical approaches that can be utilised to best effect with blended learning. So we've got Penclouth Primary School as part of the National Professional Inquiry Project, looking at numeracy and approaches to teaching and learning in numeracy through the blended learning approach. Pontedillas Primary looking at health and well-being and how check-ins can be used to promote health and well-being during lockdown. And St Joseph's Cathedral and Aberystwyth looking at creative arts and looking at ways that creative arts can still be taught. Again, we said about outdoors and the St Joseph's Clydach Primary have been working really hard in terms of their development of the creative arts in the outdoors and developing projects for children to sing, to have drama, dance, all of the things that are far more difficult now actually within the indoors in the school settings. Additional learning needs, a lot of work has been put in to allow our staff to interact with pupils with additional learning needs and to meet their needs. So there's been regular contact, differentiated tasks, and as Helen mentioned earlier, paper packs have been provided where required. Reviews have been undertaken virtually with parents to keep parents updated on progress that's been made. And obviously our STFs, our specialist teaching facilities, those schools have got those units attached, have been working really hard to make sure that the pupils in those settings have not been disadvantaged. In terms of IT, well, staff, pupils and parents have all had to upskill themselves, and there's been an awful lot of interaction between staff, pupils and parents to develop those skills through online courses, how-to guides, demonstrations on running synchronous and asynchronous lessons. Many of our practitioners in primary have provided asynchronous teaching lessons for use on our Swansea Virtual Schools website. And there's been some really systematic consideration of how to approach blended learning in the best possible way. I've seen some super examples in St Joseph's Cathedral and also St Joseph's Clydach and St David's, also with the work that they've been doing around synchronous lessons. Digital exclusion, you've just been discussing that, and you've obviously had quite a detailed update on that, but we've also had schools that have been really keen to make sure that families have still been able to access the IT equipment between lockdowns. So schools such as St Illtyd's, pupils have retained IT devices to allow them to access the online homework. We've seen some great examples in terms of marking and feedback, and undertaking that in a distance format, where we've had schools like Glencotlin, where they've been addressing the marking through learning conversations and use of apps that have got voice tools attached. And then our levels of engagement, you asked earlier about levels of engagement in blended learning and how they've been reviewed. There's been some fantastic examples. Really super examples from Craigvale Primary, where the deputy there has undertaken a really rigorous review of the blended learning approaches and the pupil engagement levels. But we've got some other super examples as well from Gowton Primary, Oystermouth Primary, Pentre Graig, where they've really dug deep to find out, you know, how many pupils have engaged, asking pupils what they've enjoyed, ask parents about what's been difficult, what's been easier for them to the learning to facilitate at home, and learning from that. And I think that's been implemented now with the most recent school closure. Communications with pupils and parents has been maintained through telephone, text, social media, websites, and a host of online platforms such as J2E, Seesaw, Class Dojo. And, you know, some of our more deprived schools, Bryn Hyfryd, Craigvale primary schools, have all worked incredibly hard and have seen significant reductions in social services referrals as a consequence of their regular engagement and communication with parents and pupils at home. On return to school, pupils have been assessed, obviously, to see where their learning needs now lie, and gaps are being addressed using the Recruit, Recover and Raise Standards grant, and some been really creative ways in which that grant has been used by schools such as Wainwen, who are doing a lovely creative literacy project, the creative curriculum at St Joseph's Clydach, Thrive and Drive, two initiatives that have been undertaken in Cadler Primary School, and the use of sports coaches in Killar, where they've used sports coaches to release staff to be able to teach pupils that are showing significant gaps in learning. And then our continuity of learning policies now are from a review of them as part of the support visits. They're explicit. They set out minimum expectations, the non-negotiables, and how to ensure that practices are consistent, and that, you know, particular approach has been taken, looking especially at things like marking, feedback, and assessments of pupils. And then other areas of consideration that schools have been dealing with, obviously on the return after the initial lockdown, there seemed to be a reduction in pupils' resilience, independence, their stamina, their pace, their concentration, and that growth mindset. And there's been a lot of work done by schools around the Education Endowment Fund Toolkit and online webinars, allowing teachers to look at pupils' understanding of ways of learning and thinking. Parkland Primary is doing some lovely work on metacognition. As a consequence, Clace on growth mindsets, and some lovely work, as I said, in Cadler on the Drive project. And then the final area in terms of well-being, obviously some of the constraints there were bereavement, pupils experiencing adverse childhood experiences during lockdown, and levels of anxiety and depression amongst pupils, and increased levels in terms of self-harm. And there's an awful lot of work being undertaken by staff as a consequence to try and redress these issues. In the Pentre Harvard cluster, for example, there's a great amount of work going on as part of the Empathy Lab project. There's, as I said, Cadler working on the Thrive project that's looking at well-being. We've had a number of members of staff across different schools undertaking adverse childhood experience and trauma training, introducing initiatives such as Wellbeing Wednesday at Bryn Hyfryd Primary, and obviously all of the work that's going on around the National Professional Inquiry projects in terms of well-being, and schools introducing initiatives such as meditation. So Damien's going to take you through now some of the ways forward that have been identified in terms of schools development going forwards. Thank you.
Thanks. Over to you, Damien.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the ways forward, the continuity and blended learning policy Sarah's talked about, they are now well tested due to class and year group self-isolation periods. So schools have learned a great deal about blended learning in a relatively short period. It comes back to your point earlier, Chair. You know, is it better now than it was in March? And I would confidently say that the provision is better than it was in March. We're always striving, and schools are always striving to improve it, but a great deal has been learnt by schools and staff with regard to engagement and provision and, you know, good teaching, if you like. The grant itself, to talk to you about the grant, the Recruit, Recover, Raise Standards grant, just some facts and figures for you, and Gareth, I can send you these later so that you're probably scribbling down so that you've got them for the minute. As it stands, the information we've got available to us, it looks as if in Swansea, this includes secondary as well, to speak for Rob as well, 23 teaching posts. So the capacity has increased teaching capacity by 23 posts. Not all of them are, it's not 23 full-time, but it's the equivalent of, so it might be 0.5 in some schools, 0.2, or even a full teacher in others. There's around about the equivalent of 58 additional teaching assistant posts, and teaching capacity increased in 21 schools. TA capacity increased in around 54 schools. There's 12 schools that increased capacity with both their teachers and TAs. 3 schools have employed or increased their learning coach capacity. They're mainly secondaries. You tend to get learning coach more in secondaries. But we're talking about increased capacity. But what it's allowed some schools to do is maintain their capacity. So it's actually, the grant has helped some schools. It's avoided 5 teacher redundancies, or the equivalent of, and 120 hours of TA redundancies. That's not 120 TAs, it's 120 hours. I think it equates to around about 4.5 full-time equivalent TA posts. So the grant has been used to maintain capacity as well as in a lot of schools to increase it. Schools are exploring, I mentioned it just now, the pedagogical approaches through research that identifying ways of maximising learning through their blended approach, through their missions and through their challenge and boards, and I can go on and give you a lot more examples. I'm just conscious you've been listening for a long time now. And learning online, it's an ongoing strategy. Many schools are using platforms, if you like Giglets and Reading Eggs, Mathletics, Bug Club, the list goes on. And we've, through our interaction with schools, we've been able to ascertain what they're using and share that then with the wider school community. The importance of teaching learning skills is evident to many teachers, and what it would be useful to mention here is when schools had that opportunity in September, when they were back, if you like, and children were back in, schools with horizon scanning, thinking this might be coming in terms of future lockdowns and certainly partial or year group isolations. Some schools spent time teaching their children how to use the IT equipment, because that was something they learned in the first lockdown. Is some not through lack of want, but it was some children and families didn't know how to get the machines online, for instance, and what to do when they were online. So schools have spent their time well teaching their pupils how to access the online platforms when they had the opportunity back in the autumn. Innovative approaches, we've talked about learning outdoors. They're going to become an increasing feature of learning and teaching in primary schools as we move forward. Health and well-being, it's a focus of the curriculum for Wales, and the impact of COVID, it's ensured many schools are focusing upon this as a priority. And again, I can give you examples of Craigvelin and Pen of Roe, for example, with their Thrive approach. And operationally going forward, schools have nurtured their relationship with parents. The engagement with parents is high, which supports blended learning during lockdown. the implementation of changes in regard to the curriculum for Wales and ALN, they're talking to parents about that. And I'd like to think, again, to repeat what Councillor Pritchard said earlier, a lot of parents are recognising the hard work that schools and they themselves as families, it's really developed relationships between schools and their families in a lot of cases, for the better. There's been reduced footfall at the start and the end of the school day with regard to the staggered starts. So I think somebody mentioned it earlier, there are some things that might well stay after all of this, and we're back to some degree of normal. And despite COVID-19, many schools are able to focus on their strategic improvement. We know what their priorities are. Most schools have reviewed their progress with regard to last year's school development plan priorities. They've amended their priorities for the current year and future years. They've still got an eye on the curriculum for Wales. They've still got an eye on the ALNet bill that's coming. And they're designing and planning and trialling their curriculum, even whilst all of this is going on. So, I do applaud the work of our schools and the work of our families and children as well in everything they've done really to get us to this point. So that's it in regard of a primary. I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
No, and thank you both. And for the committee to have that level of detail was important, I feel, because for us to do our work, I think it's important that that level of information is captured and is then reviewed, and that when the time comes, we're able to say, well, what does this mean for the way we respond to future crises, but also what does it mean about the way in which we as a council want to support our schools to operate moving forward longer term. Mike, I've got your hand up to ask a question now, and then I'll go back to Rob for the secondary schools. Mike first.
Yes, thank you. Excellent presentation, both Sarah and Darren. May I say thank you very much. And I'm pleased to hear that 27, I think it was 27, was mentioned, safety audits have been completed with excellent results across our schools. As you will appreciate, our main focus as a committee is to be given an oversight, basically, on all aspects of the effect of this pandemic on our education system and the safety protocols put in place to keep our pupils safe. Following on from that, can you confirm staff are not car sharing to and from the schools, first of all, because that makes a mockery of all the systems we have put in place if that is going on. And Darren, you mentioned better interaction with parents. How is this achieved during this pandemic? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lewis, I couldn't. I mean, Helen might be able to mention more about car sharing. That's information I couldn't. I don't know the answer to. I'm sorry, but perhaps Helen might be able to come back to that later. With regard, and Sarah, feel free to chip in with me. With regard to it's that communication with parents, and what schools are doing is they're sending quite frequently, asking their parents or their families, what could we be doing better? What's working? What isn't working? And a lot of the responses we're getting or schools are sharing with us is, really good communication. We knew what was going on. We knew what we needed to do. We understand why this is the approach the school is taking, because not every school is taking the same approach, because they are their approach is determined by the skill set of the staff, if you like, but also the school community to which they serve. But Sarah, could I ask you to give an example in particular, a good example of school and home communication and interaction? In particular, I'm thinking Craig Velin.
Yeah. I mean, the schools, I've got 8 schools, and all of them have got really robust systems to engage with parents. There's a lot of work going on in terms of the sharing of overview, a parental version of a continuity of learning plan. So parents are clear of what they can expect from the school in terms of blended learning, and also in terms of what the expectations are on parents, and also the expectations of the children as well. So there's a lot of communication in terms of this sort of overview of the blended learning approach, and then there's the communication with parents from teachers in terms of what the day-to-day expectations are in terms of the day-to-day learning. But also there's been a number of schools that have engaged with parents to almost debrief or to undertake an evaluation of how blended learning went in lockdown 1 for parents and for the children. So they've engaged not only with the parents through things like questionnaires using Microsoft Forms, but also engaging with the children, talking to the children about what went well for them, what they'd like more of. And I think that's as a consequence, that was ongoing with lots of the schools throughout lockdown 1, which was why the example I gave you about Place Primary School, where they decided to have a whole school theme, and they if a family, for example, had a pupil in early foundation phase, late foundation phase, and Key Stage 2, they were undertaking the same project, but at a different level according to their ability. And a lot of that learning was outdoors because of the feedback that parents had given, saying how difficult it was if they were trying to teach, their 3 children or 4 children with trying to teach them different things at the same time. But Craigvale in primary did a sterling job, for example, where they reviewed all aspects of the provision, the communication and so on during lockdown 1, and a very, very comprehensive report has been written, and that's been shared with their governing body.
Well, can I thank you both for that extremely comprehensive report, and it is good, for us to have, as I said, that overview is very useful indeed. Helen, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just in response to Councillor Lewis on the issue of car sharing, corporately, we have discouraged our employees from sharing cars. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Unless there's any other points, I'll call Rob in to talk about the secondary schools.
Okay, thanks, Robert.
Yeah, you've got a hard act to follow, mind.
Yeah, I know. I've only got 8 minutes left. Thanks, Damien and Sarah. We're going to have to speed through this one. Very comprehensive from the primary team, yeah? For secondary, I got myself and Rob Phillips here. We're doing it slightly differently. We've picked out a selection of secondary schools to give you a flavour of what good practice has been taking place across the autumn term, particularly with a focus on the continuity of learning. A lot of very similar messages to what you've heard there from the primary team. And all this was picked up by the Challenge Advisor team across the autumn term. I'll be looking at Bishopston, Penarrail, the PIU and Bishop Thorne, because it gives you a range of schools there from our secondary sector, and also some different features in each one, so you get a flavour of how schools have taken different approaches. So starting off with Bishopston, some really strong features on their continuity of learning was the level of training they provided for staff and pupils to deliver effective remote learning, and they went down the live streaming route for when year groups were partially in lockdown. So all engagement of staff in live streaming, all the staff had participated in live lessons. There was strong use of staff and pupil voice to refine the blended offer. So it's very much a learning thing. They were trying things, getting feedback, refining, tweaking, and so forth. It's been a really strong piece of their work. And as part of that, it's a communication with parents then about how that was going. So they were well informed, they were listening and picking up from their pupils, from their staff, from their parents, how they could deliver this as well as they could. Also within the school then they had a digital forum, so that was a group of sort of tech savvy teachers, and that was an important group really, where they pool their expertise to support the other staff who were less assured with using the technology. Obviously, quite an intimidating thing to start delivering lessons through Teams and software like that when you're not familiar with it, a whole host of problems. So good team support from within the school. And when the fire break came along then, Bishopston were pretty well prepared because it already had the Year 8 and the Year 10 bubble isolations. They were one of the first schools that had to start sending year groups home. But that put them in good stead then for the fire break about a week after half term, when the pupils in Bishopston were at home. So the approach during that second week of fire break was to draw up a timetable of live lessons, so that pupils would generally have 2 live lessons per day. They thought that was manageable for staff and pupils, and this made it more feasible for when siblings, brothers and sisters were sharing devices, or perhaps the parents as well. They introduced a sensible protocol so that pupils shouldn't use the chat facility during an explanation phase, to allow the teacher not to get distracted, so don't be peppered with questions when you're trying to model and explain things. So really thinking about the practical aspects of delivering clear instruction and explanations to the pupils. And the feedback was that pupils and staff really have enjoyed those live lessons, and I've also picked up a lot of feedback from parents, which they've been happy with how it's gone as well. As I said earlier, Bishopston provided a lot of training for its staff. They use their twilights and insets well to skill up the staff with the blended learning approaches. They've also been very generous with sharing their practice. They've been one of the schools that's led the way on this, and they've made regular contributions to our secondary networks, talking about how they've gone about it, what have been the problems, how to bring staff forward, and so forth. They've also placed a high value on the creative arts, and that's been hit hard in the pandemic, so they recognise that. So to help compensate from that, the school filmed a number of events and made them available online, things like the winter concerts, drama sketches, even a cross-country run. So thinking about, making up for the deficit of the wellbeing type things you'd get from the creative arts curriculum. So that was Bishopston. Penrail, different approach in Penrail. They've developed a strong approach to blended learning as well, but taking a different avenue. The leaders decided there to take an asynchronous approach, so using recorded materials or things sent through the virtual learning environment or hard packed resources. And they based this decision because of feedback from their pupils and their families. Their survey back in September indicated that nearly half the pupils had to share back at home. So they thought, given that, it would be difficult to move forward on live lessons. So they made the decision, right, we're going to do the asynchronous approach. And in preparation for that fire break when it came, teachers prepared a week's worth of blended learning resources as backup. So they had that in, they were one of the schools that didn't have a bubble that early on. It came much later, but they had that in their sort of locker, ready to deploy. And that put them in good stead for when the fire break was announced. Their blended learning programme included a full curriculum where pupils were required to follow a regular timetable. They built in testing and feedback to ensure that to support pupils in their learning, and so that teachers could monitor the progress. And there was good feedback from the staff and the pupils and the parents. They reported only a small number of pupils were reluctant to engage, and the school worked hard then to contact the families to increase the level of engagement. The next school I've got for you is the PIU here, now known as Maisoderu. They'll be looking to move to the new site soon. Obviously some of Swansea's most vulnerable learners and from some of the most challenging backgrounds in the PIU. Staff there worked incredibly hard to engage pupils that weren't attending. A large proportion of staff were dedicated to supporting these pupils and their families. Staff have supported the families to benefit the access from the wider services, to get to grips with blended learning, and to deal with those barriers that affect learning for those types of learners. There was daily communication with these families, and that's been actually beneficial. Actually, they found that the initial lockdown improved their relationships with families because they were doing that regular check-in with them. In fact, that phase of delivering meals and things like that, that helped the relationship with the families and was a real positive. Also, regular engagement with the EWO service as well has been important for them to make sure there's welfare checks for pupils and families. What's really interesting as well about the PIU, they've been really strong providers of the blended learning, and interestingly, they were probably the first really to blaze a trail. So they realised that to contact some pupils, they have to go down this route. Some very anxious learners in the Step Ahead Centre. And so they brazed the way with the live sessions to contact their learners. And they really started that off, I think, in the secondary networks, making schools think about how to do it. And they were sharing that practice back in July, which I think sowed the seed for our other secondary schools to think about getting on board for the autumn term. Successes and challenge experience in delivering the live sessions have been shared, as I said, through the SCASM network there. It was also picked up by Estin with visits. Pupils have also had access to paper-pack resources to complement the digital learning, or where digital learning has not been an option. For example, there have been issues around the safe use of equipment with certain pupils, so they've not been able to use that strategy. In the curriculum, there's been a strong emphasis placed on health and well-being for pupils, as you'd expect. There's been lots of opportunities to discuss their concerns, issues that are out there in the news and social media, in the community, and home-related matters. And again, this feature of a lot of our schools been really, really positive. Regular pupil surveys taking place to gauge how things are going, and in the PIU, particularly on that return in autumn, back in September and October. Lots of surveys finding out how they were, very anxious about returning in those conditions, and overwhelmingly the pupils felt they were safe when they did return. Okay, moving on to Bishop Thorne. Some really strong features. There was a really well thought through induction and return to school back in September, which allowed pupils to re-establish their routines after the previous lockdown and the summer holiday. A real emphasis on pupils understanding the boundaries, and the pupils really enjoyed being back in school. As well as the return to classrooms, the school put together a wide range of enrichment activities to mitigate against the disruption that they've experienced to routines and experiences. Activities they put together included coding, Eco Club, Latin GCSE, Classics Club, chess, master classes and various things, healthy eating, Scouts guides, first aid. There's a Price Waterhouse project, language club, craft and activities. They really thought about those wider experiences that pupils were missing out of because of the lockdown. So that was a really strong feature of the return in Bishop Vaughan. The school also worked hard to support families that remain highly anxious due to the circumstances. Anxious families typically include those who had family members who had previously required to shield. And there were some who were seriously ill as well. And in these circumstances, the schools worked sensitively with the families to ensure that learning could actually carry on. The leaders there also adopted strong evidence-based approaches to their planning. I think Sarah mentioned this. They used the Education Endowment Foundation's approach. There's a three-tiered approach, the framework. The first tier is to ensure high-quality teaching and learning for all as best we can given the circumstances. And so to do this, so they use their inset time, professional learning to focus on things like cognitive science, what's the best we know about how kids learn, high quality instruction, scaffolding, metacognitive strategies, high quality assessment, flexible grouping, and the digital skills development. So it's a really strong feature of their work and training for staff to deliver a blended fashion. Staff there also supported themselves, each other exceptionally well during the period. They shared good practice by running twilight sessions, live session walkthroughs. So those who had delivered them, they would then have staff joining in and they'd walk them through what they'd done. Pop-up workshops and things like Microsoft quizzes, drop-in digital surgeries in the staff room for staff who needed support. So it was a real sort of, team spirit to help each other. Staff and people surveys again used really well, including small-scale action research to find out how things were working. For example, people survey information indicated that staff were generally sending too much work. I think that's quite easily done. I've seen that with my kids a lot. It's easy to send stuff through the email, through the virtual learning environment. So getting that feedback from the kids, and then they were adjusting it then to ensure that the balance was right. Other examples include effective use of quizzes to help pupils with their monitoring of their progress. I think Sarah mentioned as well that metacognitive learning as well, so thinking about the process, how are we learning, and making sure they're developing those strengths. Again, clear and frequent communication with parents and carers, reinforced messages about sustainable home learning and self-regulation. That self-regulation is really important. I think schools sort of provide that naturally when you've got a timetable to follow. When you're suddenly in the home environment, that self-regulation, you've got to do it yourself, or the family's got to provide it. There needs to be that support and guidance, those routines to take responsibility for managing your learning. There's been a strength there. So overall, the leaders and staff at the school responded to the challenges presented to the pandemic in a compassionate, supportive and evidence-based ways. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Rob now, who's going to select a few more schools to give you a little bit of a wider flavour from a few other sectors as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. I support a number of secondary schools, and I could repeat what Robert just said in respect of those. Perhaps it would be more beneficial to talk about the two special schools that I support and the particular approaches that have happened there. We've heard a lot from both primary and secondary sectors about the innovative approaches that have been undertaken during this time, and that has been very much the case at the special schools, through necessity being the mother of invention there. Obviously, there were huge challenges to them. They're amongst the most vulnerable learners in the authority. A number of them have highly specialised communication needs, mobility difficulties. There may be associated behavioural difficulties with particular conditions, such as autism. There's been very successful enterprises that have been carried out in both of our special schools in making sure that there is some kind of continuity of learning and to make sure that youngsters are safe and well, whether in school environments or at home. In order to make the continuity of learning work, there needed to be, and this picks up on Councillor Lewis's point about parental involvement, there was a very heavy level of parental involvement required in order for the blended learning, particularly the distance learning, to be able to work. I mean, it's not like you could simply transmit to individual children and they would pick it up themselves. They needed their parents to support them. And so the schools undertook an awful lot of work with parents to prepare them to be able to work with their children at home. There was a lot of training involved with parents, not just of IT and making IT accessible, but to develop an understanding on the parents' part about the curriculum that was being offered and the areas for learning that were being developed and how that worked with their individual children and the IEPs of individual children, what was they were trying to do, equipping the parents with the knowledge and understanding of that, so that when they linked up, whether through live streaming or through recorded sessions, the parents were able to work with their children in a meaningful way on a series of programs, often to do with communication, often to do with routine, later on to do with more specific therapies. Obviously with physiotherapy, one had to be careful. There were no high risk programs involved there. And there were a series of individualized activities that parents were able to work with the school in making happen through the connection of the school via remote learning in what would have otherwise been nigh on impossible to achieve. So there was a mixture of virtual learning sessions and drop-in sessions for parents and their children, and specialist resources were also sent home. We talked earlier on about laptops and IT being available to parents at home. There were very specialized augmentative communication systems that needed to be sent home as well in order for youngsters to be able to work on their individual communication targets. And as I said, the parents had a clearer understanding. In Cree Glass, there was a report in Wales Online about how the school was doing this. It's quite an extensive report. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's still available now. And one of the parents there who was interviewed as part of that report said they came to know their child far better as a consequence of the blended learning approach that was being taken place. They had an understanding of what the child's development level was in a much deeper sense through participating in home learning, working in association with the school, which is quite incredible, really. As time went on, and the school was able to make the hydrotherapy pool available for parents to come and work with their children, so that the muscle tone, which would otherwise waste if those sort of programs weren't continued, was able to continue to be strengthened. There's been favourable comment on both special schools throughout this time, and they've both been able to pick up with this lockdown where they left off and take on lessons learnt. As Rob said, that sometimes there's been an overload in the past. I think some of the parents, because they're involved, there is a spotlight on them. There used to be 2 sessions every day for each and every child. That's been reduced this time to 1, so it takes the pressure off parents to a degree, and the concentration on higher quality but a little bit less of them. The arrangements in Cree Glass in terms of the approaches to continue learning have received praise from both Estin and the Health and Safety Executive. Estin have included Cree Glass as a school in its case studies of best practice, and the HSE report, and I think Sarah made reference to that, a number of primary schools are also. Cree Glass received top grades in all areas, and again is the subject of a case of best practice from HSE, because of the complex nature of the approaches that required to make sure youngsters were safe, and whether in school or out, but also in terms of the complexity of working with parents to achieve the home learning of the quality that was there.
Thanks very much for that, Rob. So conscious of time there, yes. Robert, so I don't know if people want any questions from the second side.
Again, thank you both for that, a really comprehensive overview of the work that's been going on, and the work that the schools have been doing, and the support that you've been giving them, which is all part of the system we're trying to maintain here. I've got a few hands up: Lyndon, Mike, and then Sam, when they get able to speak.
Great, and thanks too. All presentations were really excellent. Can I ask what portion of schools are doing live lessons? Or as you mentioned in the case of Penrell, and I understand that, recorded lessons, because not everybody has got a computer set and they might be sharing it. So that's the first question. And the second one is, are we doing it? Obviously, we can't do after school clubs in the same way that we could before, because people aren't learning outside the school buildings. But are we doing any online after school clubs? Because if we're not, that might be an opportunity that we're missing.
Okay, thanks, Lyndon. Yeah, to your first question, I haven't got the exact figures of how many schools are doing live lessons, live sessions as we're calling them, but it's an increasing demand. Last week there was a lot of discussion, particularly when I think we realised this lockdown was going to go on for quite some time. A lot of schools were thinking, right, we need to probably engage more regularly, with pupils through a live session, whether it's just a tutorial check-in or whether start delivering some lessons. So since last week, a number of schools have sort of switched from a more asynchronous approach to a synchronous one. Goya would be an example like that. I know Penarel are looking at it. Bishop Vaughan, Pentra Havard, so more schools are going down this avenue, and as a result we've been working with Chris Rees and a few others. We've been putting together a risk assessment to help schools plan appropriately for making sure it's as safe as it can be. So that's been working progress. So it's a changing situation like this pandemic. Everything's moving very, very quickly, but a lot more schools are getting on board. I couldn't speak for primary, but certainly the secondary side is a big appetite to do more live streaming. I see Damon's just come in.
And in primary schools, and the other thing then, the issue about online after school clubs.
Yeah, just sorry, Rob. With regard, similarly to Rob, we don't have the actual figures for primary schools, which schools are providing live lessons per se. But as Rob said, live sessions and live check-ins, there is an increasing provision for it. And when Rob says increasing demand, we're not talking about, I think I'm right, Rob, if I interpreted you correctly, it's a demand from schools for us to give them guidance. For them, the demand is coming from the school, not from the parents per se, and as Helen mentioned earlier, it's not a one size fits all. So live sessions, live lessons are not the be all and end. There are lots of ways of doing it. So it's a mixed economy, if you like. Some schools, depending on their catchment and their staff, they are providing more live sessions, if you like, than perhaps a neighbouring school. But they are all striving to meet the needs of the children as best they can. So sorry, Rob, I interrupted you there. And if you want to carry on, Rob, with after school club provision.
No, thanks, Damien. That's absolutely right. It's about getting the blend, but there's definitely an appetite from schools themselves and teachers to do a bit more, and it's all about getting that balance right. Absolutely. I haven't got any data specifically about after school activities or that wider type curriculum, Lyndon, but that's certainly something we can perhaps look at with our visits this term. I think Helen wants us to engage with schools between now and half term, and we can certainly I think it's a really good question, that wider experience, the sort of things that kids were doing after school, how are schools providing for that?
Good. Thank you very much indeed.
I'll call Mike Lewis and then Sam and then Jen Rayner.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to put on record my congratulations to the overall adaptive response of our education department to all the complications they have had to deal with during this pandemic. I just hope that I'm sure it's not just a hope. It's that all the all the implications and new protocols that may be needed will be rolled out just as well as they have been to date. I'm extremely pleased with all the reports we've had this afternoon, and know that the education department is working really, really well in this difficult circumstances. So I'd like to thank all concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. Sam?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to make a similar point to Mike about this process is constantly evolving and improving, and I think that's clear. That as time goes on, what doesn't work gets scrapped and what does work gets improved upon and built upon. And that's great to see. That really is encouraging. It's also fantastic to hear about some of the engagement you've had with parents, particularly about them maybe having a bigger view of what their children's education is, and maybe a bit more of an involved view. And so that's really encouraging. The one question I have is linked to that, and it's particularly about Welsh education. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit more about, particularly for maybe parents who don't speak Welsh. I know obviously the homework and things like that are sent in English to help them, but particularly for the children of Welsh-speaking schools, I was wondering if there'd be any knock-on effect to the children's Welsh-speaking ability, I suppose, if they're not surrounded by it. But again, I just want to say it's been a long meeting, but that's only because there's been so much positive work to share, isn't it? And so I just wanted a bit of clarification about Welsh education.
Helen, if you want to go on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer, Councillor Pritchard. On the matter of Welsh education, obviously there are benefits of synchronous learning in terms of being able to hear and listen and use transactional Welsh and to engage with the teacher and practice your Welsh skills. But obviously it's age dependent in how a pupil can engage with that. And obviously language acquisition is best achieved in the early years, isn't it? As soon as you can. There's an optimum period where that can be maximised. So it's a difficult one because a lot of our Welsh medium learners, they come from English speaking homes and they need to be bolstered. And when we looked at the accelerated learning programme monies that Damien mentioned in terms of employing additional staff to help them catch up with their learning, there was heavy weighting in that financial model from Welsh Government for that grant towards the Welsh medium schools. So that would have enabled our Welsh medium schools, if they'd returned really on their PLASC returns correctly, the number of Welsh speaking staff they had, they could have bolstered their staffing complement by using that grant to specifically help those children catch up. But over and above, I think what we've been able to do through our Swansea Virtual School is put a lot of resources there for Welsh lessons, Welsh kind of interactive work. And we're constantly and consistently signposting through our newsletter. And even in today, there's some input there on Welsh content that could be shared with staff in schools and furthermore with parents. So we are seeing it as very much a target area that we can't ignore.
Oh, thank you, Helen. That's really encouraging. Good to know.
And Jen, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. And on that Welsh theme, can I just remind everybody that on Monday, BBC Wales and S4C launched a special set of programmes targeted at families, especially where the parents were not Welsh speakers. And there's a dual option. You can have it with your subtitles or without. And I think not only will that help pupils, it will actually encourage a lot more speaking of Welsh by families in families. So what I wanted to say is every school and every head I spoke to from last half term onwards was absolutely certain that there was going to be a big lockdown in January. And schools have planned accordingly for this coming lockdown and done really well in preparing many of their pupils to learn from home. On the actual digital learning, I think we have to listen to what our schools are telling us, what is actually producing the best learning experience for our pupils. Initially, pupils were saying live lessons, must be live, must be just like being in school. Yet we know from pupil feedback and also from the work that that's not actually the best for every pupil in that class. That sometimes the recorded lessons where a pupil develops the confidence and the discipline to work through a lesson produces the best learning experience. So we have to ensure everyone has the right kit that is useful. I am still trying to work out how to get my screen to work off the TV because I'm fed up of looking at everything on a little 14-inch monitor. And we will all be doing that. So it's getting the kit out. A lot of the younger children are really happier doing it on their gaming machine rather than on a tablet or a laptop. And if that works, let's go with it. I have to pay tribute to everyone in the schools and in the department. It's been a massive learning experience. And I think it's fantastic the way Swansea schools have developed this. I go to meetings with education cabinet members from across Wales, and sometimes the questions that are being raised, I'm amazed they're even being asked, because these have been resolved in Swansea. So it's a huge tribute to schools, governors, parents, education department, that we are where we are. I wouldn't say it's perfect, because we're learning all the time, but it has been a fantastic journey since last March, when we shut down and it was a shock and we were all thinking, oh, it's only for a couple of weeks. We know what we've got to get on with. And I'm sure some of this will carry forward. I think somebody said why does everyone have to turn up at the same time and leave at the same time? It's not necessary. There's lots of options, provided we can get the kit and the right discipline in our pupils, and that's the critical thing. Self-learning. Staff have come a huge way on self-learning. If we can get pupils doing the same thing, I think we will be good and come out of this really well. And no one has lost sight of the essentials of listening to reading, learning how to write, not just work a keyboard, and how to actually organise your study. So we made fantastic games. So I'd like to thank Helen, Damien, Rob, Sarah, the entire team behind them for the fantastic support they've given to our schools, and to many of you who are all school governors as well and know what's going on. I've heard a lot of Bishop Thorne. I think Sam, you're still chair there, aren't you? Yes. Well done, Sam. And also Robert, you're in Goa, which is one of the leading Welsh comprehensives in doing blended learning. It's all good stuff. Yeah. Many thanks to everyone. Thank you.
I think those comments summarise really the tone of the meeting and how impressed we as a committee are with the work that's been going on. And let's not forget, very, very difficult circumstances. And there's been no blueprint for this, is there? We've all had to learn as we go along and respond accordingly. So it is a tribute to the staff we have, and both in the authority and in the schools of the front line. You're all frontline staff in different ways, and we really appreciate the work you're putting in. Unless there's any other comments or questions, I'll move on to item 5, which is our work plan. This is, we're not a scrutiny committee. We're a policy development committee. So in terms of our work, we are there to try and move the authority forward. I think that there's 2 issues here. First of all, because we're still in the pandemic and we're still learning our way through this, I think it's early days yet to try and formulate a policy of and consider what the policy implications are of what the learning is from the last, best part of a year now. And I also think as well, given the pressure on our staff, it's not fair to burden them with additional work developing a report for this committee at this stage. I know how Ellen, how you feel about that, but certainly I'll open it up to the committee. But if we could have your input at the moment, Helen, on that.
I'd echo your comments, Chair. I think last week we did feel as if we were in the eye of a storm again. And it did feel, it echoed really some of the lockdown feelings we had back in March, obviously to a lesser extent, but certainly it's very much a volatile period in education. I would welcome really a pause in policy development at this stage.
So I think if we pause the work on responding to on how we've responded and supported schools for now, but I think one theme that's come over strongly from the two Robs, from Damien and from Sarah, is the whole issue of well-being and how we are supporting vulnerable learners specifically. Now, my suggestion is that we consider that as a theme going forward. You know, what do we know about the support, about how we support our most vulnerable learners going through a situation like this, and also what implications that has about the way Swansea needs to be working both in the medium and the long term. So I think, you know, if we give a bit of thought to that between now and the next committee meeting, and then begin to explore those themes. In terms of defining vulnerable children, I mean, it means different things to different people. Helen, I'm aware that, you know, that there's an education social services definition. And we're not talking about the at-risk register solely. We're talking about a wider definition of vulnerability, I would suggest. And if there's any comments you'd like to make on that.
Yeah, on both issues of well-being and vulnerability, obviously vulnerability is very much fluid because we have increased vulnerability because of the crisis. And back in the lockdown period in March, we RAG rated our learners, and those who were amber may have become red by now, and certainly those who had smaller scale vulnerabilities may have become move from green to amber. So I think it's fertile territory in terms of us looking to see how this has impacted over time and how we can develop policies, because this is going to have a lasting effect on our pupils in Swansea. And on the matter of well-being, in terms of emotional health and well-being, I think it's a key matter. We do have an emotional health and well-being group, which is cross-departmental, with social services and ourselves involved, mainly through our educational psychology team. And I think there's a piece of work to be done there to explore really the impact of some of the grant funding around mental health and well-being that was in place pre-COVID and has been received during the COVID period, certainly an injection of funding, and to see really the early impact of some of that work. And some of the parental concerns I experienced across my desk last week as interim director were a lot of parents worried, not being able to cope really with the levels of anxiety in their children and displaying some mental health issues.
Yeah. And I mean, these issues aren't going to go away overnight, are they? Even if we come out of the pandemic, I think there's some underlying issues that society is going to have to deal with going forward. If the committee is happy with that, one thing I am aware of is that one of the other PDCs, the one chaired by Councillor Kerry Evans, is looking into, I think it's well-being of young carers specifically. So with your agreement, I'll invite Kerry to our next meeting so that we get synergy. You know, we want to avoid duplication, but let's hope we can dovetail some of our work with his committee's work and have that synergy that will enrich the outputs of both committees, if members agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Happy for me to extend an invitation to Kerry.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, just to clarify, Gemma, you're looking for a verbal report update. It's very similar to today on.
I think it. To be fair to the officers, I think it needs to be verbal rather than written in the next few months anyway.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Smashing.
Members agree?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other points, Jen?
Thank you. Just raise a question, really. Fully support your suggestion. It's verbal reports. But I think Gareth might need some guidance on the level of detail you want, because he has to minute these. I know a number of the people who submitted reports have been working from notes, but clearly, I mean, the standard thing for most meetings in council is to say a report was given and that's it. There's no summary. And I am expecting that that's what Gareth will be able to produce. You don't want him to try and do a verbatim report on what's been said.
No, we wouldn't want a verbatim report, but I think, Gareth, you've captured everything spot on up till now in the minutes.
Yeah, I can try, it's a summary of it. Obviously, the recording of the meeting is available to watch again, so anybody can watch it. And it's actually extremely useful for me when I'm doing the minutes, when we have, hour and a half discussion. I've got about 15, 16 pages of notes. So
Yeah.
try my best, Jim.
Okay, well, you've done us proud until now, anyway.
Very good.
Good. And any other questions, comments members want to make? If not, I can thank you for your attendance and contribution to the meeting. It's been another productive, it's been a long meeting, but I think a productive meeting. And I thank you all for your attention and input this afternoon. Diolch yn fawr.
Yeah, good. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take